Part 2 of the July 1st roundup.
Said that the criticism he has not sufficiently consulted with Congress is actually just partisan politics. He says he has consulted with Congress repeatedly, had people in repeatedly, addressed this issue repeatedly. So are you using this issue simply to score political points?
He hasn't called me, and he hasn't come to the Congress, and the Congress is everybody, and if you follow the law says, the Constitution says, if you go to war, you have to have a declaration. You can't replace that with saying, well, we had a UN resolution, we went to NATO. You know, many, many years ago, after World War II, when NATO was set up, Mr. Republican Robert Taft said, don't get into NATO, because before you know it, we'll use NATO for having us slip into these wars, and his predictions were exactly right. The sovereignty of this nation depends on us and not the UN, and the Constitution is the law of the land, and we don't have to be the constitutional lawyers to understand that. We don't need lawyers to tell us what to do and not to do, because we shouldn't be in office if we don't understand what the Constitution says. It's plain and simple. So, but he's not the first. It's been going on for so long. Matter of fact, Truman was the first one to do it. He went in under the UN resolution. I'm sure if I'd have been in Congress back in 1940, well, 1950, I'd have been as outraged as I am now. But that's a slippery slope, and unfortunately, it's leading. It's a large participant in our bankruptcy. Right now, it's estimated that wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the new estimates will be over $4 trillion. It's so hard to
$4 trillion is 8 years of our entire educational budget. Additionally, we have had approximately a tripling of the ratio between education and military and correctional expenditures. So we now have 3 soldiers or policemen for every 1 teacher ratio, whereas one time, in terms of expenditure, it would have been more like 1 to 1. We spend 1 in every 7 US dollars, not tax dollars, 7 US dollars in the prison and criminal, judicial, and military and security state apparatus.
At a time when we can't even pay for medical care for people in this country.
You know, the president also made a point about the message that this debate that's happening in the U.S. is sending to the broader world. Here's what he said.
We should be sending out a unified message to this guy that he should step down and give his people a fair chance to live their lives without fear.
Now, there are 2 points here I'd like to make. We want to go over to the storyboard here, the Western media storyboard. Well, the yellow is the pretext, and then the weak domestic reporting on the opposite side of the story, followed up by a justification by demonization of the opponent, and that can occur at any old time. And then finally, a mythology about ourselves, or in this case, perhaps about the rebels as well. Now, Obama, in stating that Gaddafi had to step aside and let his people be free, is first of all violating or narrating Section 3.2, which is that the Libyan loyalists are not allowed to be considered. There's only one loyalist, Gaddafi. He's the only one who supports the regime. All others are in terror, which is a textbook invasion caricature of the opponent. And then he goes on to say, do not live in fear. And then this is an issue. I haven't put it into the fabric yet. But the issue is the rebels likely position towards secular equal rights, where Gaddafi is a Islamic secularist, as you'll find out shortly. So let's get back to it.
And then this suddenly becomes the cause célèbre for some folks in Congress? Come on.
This guy's talking about Gaddafi, that the U.S. should be unified and say Gaddafi should step down. So,
Oh, yeah. Hey, so
he seemed to be implying that members
Gaddafi's
of
the only
Congress...
bad guy in the world?
Well, I'm asking, do you agree that members of Congress who are calling for U.S. troops to leave Libya are sort of are sending mixed messages to Gaddafi, and is it important that U.S. politicians are unified on the issue?
Well, no, it's not important.
Well, so that's suppression of dissent, the mixed message thing. So we'll make sure to make a note of that. Make sure that's in there. Suppression of dissent. So you're not supposed to criticize them because you might embolden their enemies. Embolden enemies. The old embolden enemies one. Okay. All right.
Free country supposed to do? What are democracy supposed to do? What are debates all about? This idea that you can't dissent from a president that we sincerely believe is thwarting the Constitution, we're not supposed to say anything? I mean, that's just beyond imagination. So, but the whole idea, because he's a bad guy and we don't like him, and he might have done something if we hadn't gone in, but they said Gaddafi might kill civilians. Well, how many civilians have been killed since we've been involved in bombing him? Hundreds, if maybe thousands of individuals being killed over there, and Gaddafi's not killing his own people.
So make a note that Ron Paul has disputed part of the official Western narrative, which is he's killing his own people.
But there are a lot of bad people in the world. Does he want to do that in every dictatorship around the country? But we have, since the Cold War ended, we've assumed this responsibility that we have to dictate to every single country which dictator should run their country. So when there's a good dictator, you know, we sort of give them a lot of money. When they turn against us or we decide he's a bad dictator, I mean, it wasn't so many years ago that we were doing business with Gaddafi. Just a few years ago. The same, it's just over and over. At one moment, we're their best friends, as you know, we were on the same side as bin Laden was when the Soviets were in Afghanistan, and he became our arch enemy. Saddam Hussein was our best friend in the 80s. We helped him, and we even helped them get a nuclear reactor at one time. And so it's this flip-flopping around, and we forget about the purpose of the Congress and the President. Supposed to protect the sovereignty and the safety of this country, not to take care of the whole world and police and decide which dictator is going to run it.
Switching gears, sir, if we could for a moment. You're opposed, let's talk about the economy here. You're opposed to cutting a deal to raise the debt ceiling. You've argued that we should just let that deadline come and go and that we'll survive without a financial crisis. But in a press conference today, the president disagreed.
Well, I want to address what I've been hearing from some quarters, which is, well, maybe this debt limit thing is not really that serious. We can just pay interest on the debt. For the U.S. government to start picking and choosing like that is not going to require a lot of confidence.
Okay. Now let's switch over to Russia Today. And let's go. Started at about...
What we need and who even are the terrorists. Joining me now to talk more about that is Susan Lindauer. She is a former CIA asset. She covered Libya at the United Nations during the negotiations for the Lockerbie trial, so she really has a lot of insight into Libya. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, first of all, with this new counterterrorism strategy, I'm just curious if you have any reactions to it. What changes? I mean, Afghanistan and Pakistan are still the target, you know, the target still Al-Qaeda. It's all the same stuff. So do you think resources will be just redeployed from Afghanistan into other areas?
I think that it is, I'm very disappointed in President Obama for thinking that politics, that the platitudes are going to address the terrorism issue. What I see us doing is creating more terrorism through our policies in Libya and Yemen. I think that our actions speak louder than words. That adage holds true on anti-terrorism. We are firing up Islamic fundamentalists, and we are not, our actions are not proactive. They are not problem solving. We're actually making the situation much worse.
Do you think that that's going to continue? Because as we hear Obama give plans for some troops to pull out of Afghanistan, we hear lawmakers call for resources to other areas, such as Yemen and Pakistan and other countries. So do you think that we just see this war take on a different face in a different country?
Yes, and I'm especially disturbed about Libya. The United States is pulling troops out of Afghanistan so that we can go into Libya. And what my documentation is showing, as an asset, as a former asset, I have extremely good time and knowledge and depth of resources inside Libya today. What I'm finding is a video documentation that NATO rebels are actually the same Al-Qaeda fighters that we've been dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan, who've now come home to Libya.
And that's what I want to hear about. Because we just heard Obama today say that Gaddafi essentially is a terrorist, and the U.S. is abiding by the UN mandate to fight that. So what do you see as the reality, and what evidence do you have that it is Al-Qaeda that is, amongst these rebels?
Well, first of all, I was directly involved in the 1990s operation to get terrorists out of Libya. Now, I can assure you that all terrorists were moved from Libya by about 1998, 1999. Since then, Gaddafi, by the way, was the first government to inform Interpol about Osama bin Laden. Gaddafi is hated by Islamic fundamentalists because he is a socialist Muslim and he has a very different agenda that is not Sharia. Gaddafi has a very strong record on women's rights. Women have the right to education, hold property, divorce, hold jobs, have income, many rights that other women in the Arab world do not have. So
and in fact, one gentleman, as he was coming into Tripoli, remarked that most of the volunteers he saw at the checkpoints, as opposed to the uniformed people, were women, and many of them were black women. So this is a very serious fear that women and minorities may not receive the same treatment under more conservative order of the rebels.
He is a moderate, and he is not involved in any terrorism at all. That is absolutely foolishness.
So then do you see the United States role in backing the rebels, actually making the fight in the war on terrorism against Al-Qaeda worse?
We have shifted. I'm amazed. I'm so disappointed in Obama that he is actually shifting resources to finance Al-Qaeda rebels and to provide U.S. enforcement of the Al-Qaeda presence in Libya. Now, I just want to tell you, I want to tell your viewers, we have video documentation that is coming from refugees fleeing the rebel stronghold, and they're bringing out video from their camera phones that they're recording just on the spot. Videos of beheadings, videos of castration, where they are gouging out the eyes of men who oppose the Libyan rebels. Women are being raped and subjected to having their breasts cut off.
I mean, it all sounds horrific. I'm with you.
So that is the news coming in from Russia today, and this is CIA Analyst Susan Lindauer. So obviously for follow-up we need to check up on her because that's some very serious allegations she's making, that she has this material of mutilation. So let us make a note and let us get back to a review of the items. So the next item on our agenda is a New York Times editorial, the Libya campaign. 4 months into the NATO air campaign, I hope you guys are in high definition. Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi is still in power, protected by loyalists and mercenaries. There they at least grant that loyalists exist. NATO must not give up. So now hopefully they'll tell us why. If Colonel Gaddafi is allowed to have his way, thousands more Libyans will die. They don't elaborate on what will happen if another alternative future occurs and what is happening now. In fact, Libya had a very low death rate, at most 3 per 1,000 compared to America's 8 per 1,000. What's made a lot of the Libyans die has been the NATO bombardment and the rebellion. Now, that's just objective fact. Colonel Gaddafi, who has a long history of sponsoring national terrorism, is not one to let bygones be bygones. The credibility of NATO in this country would also be severely damaged. So here, if we don't want to lose face, and a long time ago, Gaddafi was involved in arming revolutionary movements and so forth back in the 80s, over 20 years ago, but he could use it to get revenge on us. So this is an incredible paragraph. It's an incredible paragraph from beginning to end of disinformation and horrendous reasons that calculate things in the most callous terms possible. So this, let us look at our board and see where this fits in. So let's see here. Forgive me. Okay, so this credibility issue goes to my issue right here, which is we create a mythology about ourselves, and specifically in this case a cynical